Call the meeting to order. It's a meeting of October 5th. We'll note that all commissioners are present. First item of business is the order of business. Are there any changes to the order of business? Hearing none, would there be a motion to approve the order of business?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The motion carries. Second item is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda you wish to discuss?
I'll move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We'll move to tab 4. Item A is a request from the Sunset Senior Citizen Center. And Mr. Kessel, would you introduce that?
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. The Sunset Senior Center has made a request for funding because they've had damage due to the weather, and the total amount of that damage is about $5,000. They did receive some insurance reimbursement, and this $5,000 is part that was not reimbursed. We do have a senior citizen grant program that is administered annually. They receive about $4,200 as part of that grant program. They use all of those funds to pay for utilities, and so it is not dollars that they can redirect towards these repairs. If we look at the money for the grant program comes out of the 1% sales tax. 20% of that is used for grant programs. 1% of the 20% funds this specific program. We have dollars left in that account that total just under $3,500. So we can certainly use that balance, and we have sufficient reserves to cover the total of bill of just over $5,000, if that is the intent of the commission. It is certainly my recommendation that we cover at least the $3,446, and they have $18,000 in savings accounts, so they simply don't have the means to cover an expense like this.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Any comments or questions for Mr. Kessel?
Mr. Mayor, the $19,000 that was returned to the city when we granted for it, that's been used for other grants?
That was a special grant, and it wasn't returned to the city. They estimated an expense of $70,000. The actual expense was less than that by almost 20, so we only paid, right, so there wasn't an actual return of cash. Yep, and that was in 2008.
So, Mr. President, they're just asking for $5,000, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Kessel that we have the resources to grant the entire request. As I read Mr. Kessel's memo, from this year's budget, we have $3,446 of excess funds, but we also have carryover excess funds from prior years.
Yes.
So we could do the entire $5,000.
I make a motion to approve the grant request
Second.
For $5,000.
for $5,000.
We have the motion, the second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote on the motion. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Move to item 4B, which is first reading of a change to the hospitality tax ordinance. Mr. Kessel or Mr. Colling, anything that you'd want to say by introduction?
Mr. President, Commissioners, this is a revision to the existing hospitality tax ordinance that was reported on at the last meeting. The change to the ordinance is fairly minor at this point. The current hospitality tax indicates that a a total of not less than 20% of the revenues from the hospitality tax are dedicated to support visitor attraction through the Dickinson Convention and Visitors Bureau. This change to the ordinance would eliminate that 20% requirement and put funding of the Convention and Visitors Bureau from the hospitality tax at your discretion as a commission in your annual budgeting process.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. At this time, I'd invite anyone from the public who wishes to comment regarding this ordinance change. If you'd like to comment, step to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments.
Mayor Johnson and City Commissioners, I am Terry Thiel, the Executive Director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. This hospitality tax was created by hospitality partners in this community many years ago. It was an involved process. It was not defined solely by a city commission. The industry was an advocate for the promotion and marketing of Dickinson as a visitor destination. Neither the CVB office nor the CVB board members were contacted about this proposed ordinance change until just over a week prior to the report to the City Commission, September 21st. The Convention and Visitors Bureau is an advisory committee to the City Commission in administering the proceeds of the hospitality tax. The CVB board and myself would like to meet with each of the members of the commission to discuss the proposed changes in the ordinance. We request that the City Commission place this proposed ordinance change as a timetable agenda and public hearing at the next commission meeting, October 19th, in order for ample time for public input.
Any questions or comments for Ms. Thiel? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else that wishes to comment? Any comments by city commissioners or city staff?
Mr. President,
Mr. Carlson?
I'd have no problem waiting until October 19th, next meeting. I just remember now that there's only going to be 3 of us here at that one. Can this be put off till the first meeting in November?
It
with the full board
would.
present?
You know, the purpose of first reading really is to kind of put the community on notice that there are changes possible. And I have no problem after doing a first reading to have one or more public hearings on this issue. And, you know, if we acted on first reading tonight, we could schedule a public hearing for the next meeting, which is 2 weeks from now. And if that isn't sufficient, we can schedule 2 public hearings, and you would have, you know, 4 weeks in between that and any action taken on second reading.
I'd have no problem with two public hearings, next meeting and the second meeting. Would request that, Ms. Thiel, can you get us, I know you gave us a copy of your budget earlier when we were going through the funds and so on. Can you get us another one so that we can have that for the next meetings? Thank you.
Other comments? If there's no other comments, I would just make a few here. If you look at the handout in tab 4, which is part of the 2010 budget, but it's a memo from Tina Johnson that relates to the changes in the 2010 budget. Attached to that is a spreadsheet for the CVB revenues. Right now, the ordinance requires that we contribute at least 20% of the hospitality tax to the CVB. And in the past, that hasn't been a problem because the amount that the city had historically budgeted exceeded the 20%. But with the growth of the hospitality tax, along with it, the growth of the occupancy tax, the amount of money that our present ordinance requires us to contribute to the CVB exceeds their annual budget. And if you look at 2008, we actually contributed, I think, $110,000. We were in violation of our own ordinance. It should have required us to contribute nearly $119,000. I ran some projections for 2009 and estimated the hospitality tax revenues at $650,000. That would require, if that turns out to be the case, that would require that we contribute $130,000 to the CVB. Now, along with the contribution from the hospitality tax, they receive 100% of the occupancy tax. And if you notice, that has been growing. We have the numbers from 2006, actual numbers through 2008, projected numbers for 2009. And if these projections are correct, we would be required in total to fund them at the rate of $440,000 when their budget is $305,000. Their next year budget is projected to be about $323,000 if we assume 5% growth in these taxes. These tax revenues, you see that the revenue greatly exceeds the budget. And to have an ordinance that just requires us to take 20% without any decision-making and debate here by this elected body, I don't think is proper. So I'm very much in support of the ordinance change that we have before us tonight, and I would certainly urge that you vote to approve the first reading of it.
Mr. President, I also had gotten a call regarding this, and my explanation to the public when they called me was that I understand that we as commissioners only represent 25% of the property taxes, but if we're cutting, which some of our speakers said at the last meeting, if we got to cut our budget, why are we going to give more money to people or departments that don't need it? And I, too, am going to support this ordinance of changing it.
Thank you, Ms. Stuckert. Any other comments? If there's no other comments, would there be a motion regarding this item?
I'll make a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance 1373.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have the motion and the second. Further discussion?
You know, you look at the numbers and it's hard to see what the problem is. I'm sure willing to meet with anybody who'd like to meet with us, but I don't know why we're not discussing it here, and I guess we can at a future meeting. But it's hard to see what the issue is here. But I'm certainly willing to meet with whomever.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Other comments?
I guess one of the reasons we would like to visit is some of the numbers that we received for the projections with our meeting that we had, we don't feel are accurate on the lodging. The numbers in the projection, the discrepancy is between the occupancy tax for 209 that's projected and even with 208. As an example, the 209 occupancy tax projection prepared by the city indicated total revenue of $310,000 in lodging. The actual year-to-date received through September of '09 is $163,213. That would require that we would need just in lodging the $146,788 to finish out the last 3 months. If we were to do that, we would have to average almost $49,000 for the last 3 months. We don't, our highest, even 3 months that we've gotten has been around 30,000. I think we've reached that maybe 3 times in the last few years per month. So we have a question on some of the figures with the lodging. I mean, right now, as I said, we'd have to be making almost 49,000 for October, November, and December. So we would like to visit about that, make sure that the numbers are accurate. If we took the actuals that was given to us for that CVB revenue on lodging, for 208 actual, on here it says 229,551. That was 13 months. So my figures for what we received for 1 year is $216,583 on the lodging. If you're going to take that and go to the 310,000, using our actual figures for the 216,583, that'd be a 43% increase by the end of the year over '08 that we would have received just in lodging. Then I look at the 2010 projection, 325,000, that's a 4%. That's a large discrepancy between 43% and 4% for the next year. So we would like to visit. We'd like to individually visit, show you how we arrive at things, how we arrive at our budgeting, how we arrive at reserves, how we arrive at how we project for the next year. That's what we ask, to visit with you.
Okay, we need to know those numbers, but I would hope that we'd have them at a meeting, a future
Yes.
meeting too. Okay. I look forward to seeing them.
I just have one question for you, Terry. You know, we are trying not to raise property taxes. And at the meeting where you did your presentation, you said you do have money in reserve.
Yes, we do. We went through an extensive background with Randall Marketing. That was a cooperative effort through the North Dakota Tourism Division and our CVB in May of 2000. We looked at everything for our city assessment. We looked at our organization, our governance, our funding, how we do visitor attraction, everything. We have a whole long day of that. I've condensed down into DVDs for you guys to take a look at how we arrived at those things. I asked specifically while we were there, what do you think we should have for an annual reserve? If the city commission asks us, what for our size is accurate? And they said a year. A year of public funding, okay? And I checked with other CVBs throughout the state, 6 months. Those are emergency ones. If something happens, if all of a sudden we had the tornado, if all of a sudden the pandemic flu came through, because our visitation comes from the outside. If we have construction workers or whoever come from different areas and we have that, that does affect us. If we have a tornado, we got to start doing other forms of marketing. We've got to start stepping up gears for emergencies. So we did that, and based on the budget for that, we went in and looked at it, and we talked about it specifically. We have an annual retreat. It's good planning, and maybe everybody agrees with it, but we came up with the number. If we had a budget of $300,000, then we take half of that, our 6 month. They said a year. They said, well, maybe 6 months. That's up to you guys, but I checked 6 months. What do we do with those leftover monies? We've been very fortunate. We've worked our butts off to try to get people here. Well, we do investment projects. Those are the ones that we list, the things that we see, and we're just getting the different properties in town to be able to go ahead and market. We've got opportunities now to go ahead and market. I mean, good for us. We're taking that money. We've gone through an audit. We do that. We do annual reports. Anytime if anybody wants to come in, we try to our board works hard to make sure that we're handling that money properly. And if we've gained in those incomes, that's more that we've got to go out and keep selling the city. And we're finally getting those properties up and ratcheting, those hotels. We're finally getting all the different things that are coming our way to do that. I've got a board that works with us. They oversee that. City administrator have been with us all through this. And Sean, we do want you at the meetings. It happened when you first got there. I called and said, I know you're busy right now. Let's get together. We were going to have a luncheon. The tornado came. It just hasn't happened that way. We had another board member come in. Well, you know what? We forgot it was on that Monday. But no, we want him there. Greg and I work very, very closely together on trying to estimate what lodging would be. I'd always go under a little bit. Greg, what do you think? Keep it so that, you know, you're always conservative. I tried to do that. So I am willing and open to anybody coming in and asking questions and seeing how we're doing this. We have a board that works very hard. They oversee it. They're not just checking in with us once in a while. And annually, we try to review everything and where we can go for the next year.
I'm not opposed to meeting with any of you, really, Terry. It's just a matter of that we are trying to cut and trim the budget, and that's where we're at, or that's where I'm at, and certainly if everyone.
I
wants to
understand
come
that too. But as it stands, this ordinance is a hospitality tax that is divided 3 ways, and one of them is for capital construction for visitor attraction. And then that money is supposed to go to that. As we all are understanding it, that tax is dedicated to the hospitality industry. It's like you asked me before in June, and I was happy to answer that. But that goes back to that those proceeds, that when the industry got together and they got together and got that tax, that would go back to something that goes for visitor attraction. So would it go for streets? That's not how we see it. That's not what we're understanding with the ordinance.
No one is, excuse me, but no one is proposing that the tax be used for anything other than what it's supposed to be used. To me, this is an issue of transparency also, and understanding what that ordinance is requiring us to do. The ordinance is requiring us, the present ordinance is requiring us to take 20% of the hospitality tax along with 100% of the occupancy tax and turn it over to an organization that right now, that tax appears that it would exceed your budgeted expenditures by $100,000 a year. You have a good surplus of funds right now. You have a strong reserve. And we can argue about whether it's strong enough or not, but you're sitting on close to $200,000 in reserves. So you're in good shape financially. I don't understand why we should have an ordinance that requires us to keep funding you in excess of your budget. I think that's the issue. If you have projects in excess of your annual budget that are good projects, you can come before the city commission and request funding for those projects, just like anybody else would. There's no restriction there.
We have $200,000, but part of that, while it's the 150 that we talked about, are also still part of our operating that we do through the remaining of the year. The other thing with the projects is that I've got a board that works with me, and we have no problem visiting with everybody with that.
You showed me your balance sheet
Yes.
as of the end of September. As I recall, you have $200,000 in equity there.
Yes, we do.
You-
And we
you-
also
and-
still have.
And most of it is very liquid. You had something like $3,800 in accounts payable.
We also got payroll that comes up.
Yeah,
We keep working
but-
through the whole end of the year.
But you have your operating revenues that are coming in to cover that, too.
Yes, we do.
So your balance sheet shows that you're in a very strong position.
Yes,
I don't
we are.
understand why we as a commission should continue with an ordinance that was passed by a commission that requires us to fund at such an excessive level. To me, that is not being good stewards here of the taxpayers' money.
Well, the 200,000 also included the reserves that our board had come up with. After that, we do project investments. They take a look at the end of the year, if there's revenue that's over that, and then we make lists, and those are the things that we are able to fund.
I'm not arguing you shouldn't have a reserve. What I would argue is how much is enough. And you would argue, you're going to take the position apparently that it should be more than $200,000. I'm going to take the position that I think that's an adequate reserve.
Well, our board takes a position that we look at our budgeted income for the next year as we work with it, and we take half of that, the 6-month reserve. That's how we've arrived at that.
I just want to say, I wasn't here when the ordinance was done, but I know that we've increased like 200 more motel rooms, and we're going to have a beautiful convention center here shortly, so there will be a lot of money coming in. And we're fortunate with the occupancy tax. Who knows when it'll change, but for now, I guess I want to trim. And like the mayor said, we can always give you money whenever you need it.
If you were to trim, where would you put it?
Well, I think if you have 200,000 reserve, I don't think you need 20%.
But where would you take that money? Where would you put it?
It would be held in the hospitality tax trust fund, or
Right.
not
Okay.
trust fund, in the fund, and used for the projects that state law would allow us to use it for.
That's
It,
all.
it doesn't go into the general fund. I've had a couple of calls on that, and we have a hospitality tax fund. And I think that's the proper place for the excess revenue, not in the CVB reserve.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the motion and the second. Is there any other discussion by commissioners on this?
Uh,
Mr. Steiner?
Mr. Mayor, just if we can, Ms. Thiel, again, these numbers that you were giving us, if you can just show them to us again in your presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Coley, I have a question for you. Did you get a chance to look at the state law that governs the hospitality tax? And if you did, can you kind of tell us what its guidelines are?
Yes, Mr. President, the state law on the hospitality tax requires that all money collected under the hospitality tax be deposited in a visitor promotion capital construction fund. And that is, what we do is, through our accounting, is make sure that all of that money is deposited in that fund with the city. State law then allows for certain items to be purchased out of that capital construction fund. And the limits that state law gives is that the money is to be used for tourism or for the purchase, equipping, improving, construction, maintenance, repair, and acquisitions of buildings or property consistent with visitor attraction or promotion. So basically, that fund is at your discretion to use for tourism purposes or the acquisition of capital projects related to tourism.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Coley. Any other comments here? If not, we have the motion and the second. We'll go ahead and vote. It's a motion to approve the first reading. We'll begin with Mrs. Stuckert,
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel,
Aye.
Mr. Jackson,
Aye.
Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. We have a 5:30 timetable agenda item. There's actually 3 items here regarding special use permits. We'll declare a public hearing open for all those items, but we'll take them one at a time, and we'll call upon Mr. Soren to introduce them. So, Mr. Soren?
Thank you, President Johnson. City Commissioners, the first item we have is a special use permit for home occupation for Renew Aesthetics. We received a request from Robert and Regina Kusick to operate a home occupation at 629 10th Avenue West. The business that they're planning to do includes services such as Botox, facial fillers, laser treatments, things of that nature. We did hold a public hearing at Planning and Zoning regarding this and did have no one in opposition to their request. I did receive several phone calls from people in the neighborhood telling me that they didn't have any concerns with what they're planning to do at this location. And with that, Planning and Zoning is recommending approval of the special use permit for this business.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Soren. At this time, I'd invite anyone from the public who wishes to comment on this particular item to step to the podium and state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anybody from the public? Either for or against?
Hi, my name is Regina Cusick. I'm the one that put this together. We have always been a part-time business, and we've had a lot of requests from clientele, from patients for more privacy, and we thought this would solve our problem.
Okay. So you're in favor of doing this?
I'm in favor
Okay.
of doing this, yes.
Thank you. Any comments or questions by commissioners? Hearing none, then we'll let you sit back down. Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment on this item? There's no one else that wishes to comment, any comments by commissioners? You've heard Mr. Soren's introduction, his recommendation, you've heard some testimony. Would there be a motion regarding this special use permit?
I'll move for approval.
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Stuckert?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We'll move to the second item, Mr. Soren.
The next request we had was from Jennifer Olson, who also has requested a special use permit to operate a home occupation. This one would be at 276 Kashinsky Drive. The business that she is planning to operate is a massage therapy. She currently has an office in Belfield and has an increased number of clientele coming from the city of Dickinson, and is hoping to open this up in her home to try and service those people. We did have a public hearing on this one as well. No one was present to speak against this one. I did receive one phone call from a neighbor who had concerns about the parking in the area. She did, through the process of our public hearing, say she would only have one client at a time, and they would have access to her driveway for parking, eliminating any of the concerns of blocking driveways and things of that nature. And with that, Planning and Zoning is recommending approval of this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Soren. If there's anyone from the public that wishes to comment regarding this issue, again, you can step to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anyone from the public? No one from the public that wishes to comment. Any comments from city commissioners? There's no one from the commission. Would there be a motion regarding this item?
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
And the last one we have was a special use permit for a parking lot in a R1 low family density zone district. And this comes from the Dickinson Public Library, who owns the lot directly north of the library across the street, and is in the process of negotiations on purchasing an additional lot. With the expansion of the library and the use, they are seeing needs for additional parking in the area, and is hoping to do that at this location. We did hold a public hearing at Planning and Zoning on this one as well, and they are recommending approval of the special use permit for the parking lot.
Thank you, Mr. Soren. Again, if anyone from the public wishes to comment regarding this issue, you may do so. Step to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments.
My name is Cheryl Tollefson, and I am the library director. I'm speaking for the library board and the library foundation. This is an opportunity for us to develop Lot 7, which we've owned for a number of years. We had purchased that from Ed Hauk, and we did not have really enough space to put in what we wanted to as far as parking, so buying the ability to acquire the other house and the 37 more feet, we can gain 24 parking spaces for the neighborhood. We want to make it very neighborhood-friendly. There's enough space where we can have a nice barrier zone between the last row of parking and the next house, and we're willing to put up a fence and some plantings. And so we're really in favor and we're excited about it.
Thank you. Any comment, or anybody else from the public wish to comment on this issue? Anybody else from the public? No one else from the public? Would any of the commissioners wish to comment? No comments by commissioners. Would there be a motion regarding the item?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
move to approve the special use permit application submitted by Dixon Area Public Library.
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carried. Mr. Soren, I think that completed that item?
Yes, it did.
Okay. We have a 5:45 timetable item, and that is to hear a report from Pastor Steve Tangen regarding the Unmet Needs Committee. And so, Pastor Tangen, we welcome you to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioners, let me first extend my thanks on behalf of those impacted by the tornado for the city's leadership in the recovery process. Thank you to the National Guard. We are also aware of the tremendous emergency services provided by the Salvation Army and the Red Cross. And one of the more publicized events following the tornado was the Band-Aid relief concert. And as of today, I'm received a check from that concert in the amount of $57,562, contributed by the community on July 19th. Those dollars added to additional dollars that have been contributed by the community will allow us to begin later this week distributing $89,000 to applicants to our Unmet Needs Committee. Now, let me say just briefly something about unmet needs. Prior to the tornado, I had no idea what that phrase meant. I've discovered since that communities all over the country, when disasters occur, talk about unmet needs. Unmet needs are essentially the needs of those households after a disaster, after insurance has been received, and after FEMA grants have been provided, and other resources made available. Unmet needs are those building needs that remain for those who have been impacted by that particular disaster. In North Dakota in 1997, after the Grand Forks flood, North Dakota's nonprofits and religious organizations put together a group called RAFT, Resource Agency's Flood Team, that has been a great resource in the face of disasters. And now following the Northwood tornado and our tornado, they need to change it from flood team to flood and tornado team. They have an application form that we provided to residents of South Dickinson. Those applications ask for people to specify what their unmet needs are and how we might assist them in responding to those unmet needs. After those applications are sent to Bismarck to the RAFT people, then the RAFT folks find volunteer case managers from the Dickinson area who take each application, meet with the applicants, not just to be sure that the dollar needs are there, but also to assist those applicants and other resources that they may have not thought were available to them. And in some cases, those case managers meet 2 and 3 times with the applicants. Our experience is that they're providing blankets in some case, furniture in another case, and the case managers then become, in a sense, caregivers for those who've applied. There are 47 applications that we have received and are acting on. We believe that that is an appropriate number. Generally, in communities affected by disasters in North Dakota, about 10% of households affected apply for these funds. And if you use the FEMA number of some 470 Dickinson households who registered with FEMA, then our 47 applications is right on target for that. After the case managers review the applications, then each application is presented to our committee. They're presented by number. No name is given. The personal details that may identify particular families are removed, and the case manager's representative, a woman named Val Reinhiller from Bismarck, presents them case by case and makes a case then for the amount of dollars that our committee will provide to that particular applicant. And in this first go-around, we have $89,000 that will be divided among those 47 applicants. The applicants' needs are based on the number of people in the household, the age of people in the household, respecting the fact that there may be elderly people, household income, household extraordinary expenses and bills, and then the damage that has been done to their living quarters. As we distribute those dollars, they do not go specifically to each applicant. If an applicant has had building costs that need to be reimbursed, then we send them a check to reimburse that. If there are building events that need to take place yet, then we provide checks to local businesses in the form of a voucher so that residents can then purchase through that voucher building supplies that they need to continue in the rebuilding process. I would use the phrase "the first go-round" because we have received more than $89,000. We needed to set a deadline, and therefore that deadline of a couple of weeks ago was for $89,000. We continue to receive funds, and after this first dollar amount is disbursed, we will then return to those applications, find those in greatest need, and disperse some additional dollars. We will also reopen the application process if there are people in South Dickinson who have unmet needs who haven't filled out that application yet. My reason for mentioning this is to alert the public to the fact that we are still in need of funds and still receiving funds. The United Way has been very gracious to provide the accounting for those dollars, and so we ask those dollars be sent to the Unmet Needs Committee at 501, Post Office Box 501 here in Dickinson. I am very aware of the fact, through phone calls, that there's lots of rebuilding work to be done in South Dickinson. There are people hoping to rebuild homes who have yet to have a contractor begin the process. There are people living away from their homes, waiting for the remodeling process to finish, hopefully to get back in by Thanksgiving, hopefully to get back in by Christmas. And therefore, I would encourage the commission and the community to be aware of the fact that we are not anywhere near the end of the rebuilding process, especially when it comes to the lives of those who have been impacted, those who have been displaced, and those who are our sisters and brothers in this community. So I thank you for your time. I wanted to make known to you the fact that we are beginning disbursements of funds later this week, and we are always willing to take more checks. Any questions that you have of me?
Mr. Kessel?
Not so much a question, but a compliment to Mr. Tangen. When we began this Unmet Needs Committee, there was little that was known about it, and you speak to how many different communities in North Dakota and around our nation that have them. Until you go through an event, you don't pay particular attention. And Pastor Tangen stepped to the plate. He agreed to be the chair with very little information as to how much of a time commitment it would be. And I want to thank him for being the chair, and he's done an admirable job. I've been at several of the meetings, and I really appreciate his time and efforts.
Thank you. You also provided me with a great committee. 7 people serve on our committee with 3 advisors, and another resource we have are people from RAFT, other communities that have been through this, and those folks are great to come in and tell us what we don't know and how can we respond to the things we don't know. So, learning process.
Any other questions or comments? Well, I too would add my thank you, and it's pretty obvious you're doing a great job, and I appreciate receiving an email from you several weeks ago where you volunteered to either serve on the committee or chair the committee, and you were our first choice to chair it, so great job, thank you.
Did you have any other choices?
No. We'll move to item C then, which is the September financial report, and Mrs. Johnson, and I see we have a little different format here. We move the screen over to the commission's right side.
Mr. President, Commissioners, I'd like to highlight a few items from the financial report through August. On our monthly fund cash balance report, the balance in our general fund is $3 million at the end of August, which is $43,000 more than last year. And the balance in our development impact fee projects line item is $992,000, which is the amount owed to the city being paid through special assessments. In our account and investment balances report, the balance held in our checking and investment accounts totals $30 million through August, and of that amount, $12,740,000 is in our general investments, $11.8 million is in our pension funds, $3.5 million is in our Dickinson Future Fund, and $1.8 million is in our general checking and money market accounts. In our revenue report, with 67% of the year completed, our total general fund revenues equal $5.5 million through August and are 75% collected compared to budget. Of that amount, our current property taxes equal $2.8 million and are 96% collected. Our building permit revenue is $77,000, which is 65% collected compared to budget and about 3% more than last year. Our oil and gas production totals $96,000, which is 36% less than last year. And our leases, easements, and royalties totals $102,000, which have decreased 65% over last year. In our enterprise funds, our water distribution fund revenues total $2.2 million and are $200,000 less than last year. And our solid waste fund revenues total $1.4 million and are $100,000 more than last year. In our expenditure and capital outlay report, our total general fund expenditures equal $5.2 million through August and were 70% expended compared to budget. And our enterprise fund expenses together totaled $2.8 million and were 68% expended compared to budget. In our additional report section, our sales tax schedule shows we received $263,000 of 1% sales tax revenue and $132,000 of 0.5% sales tax revenue in August. And our sales tax revenue is up 9.4% for the year. In our sales tax breakdown, in the 1% sales tax fund, we have paid out $378,000 in job creation and senior program subsidies through August, and $1 million towards the Badlands Activity Center. In our 0.5% sales tax, we have paid out $683,000 towards the West River Community Center bond. In our hospitality and occupancy tax breakdown, we have paid out $965,000 from the hospitality tax, which includes $800,000 to the Badlands Activity Center, and $126,000 from the occupancy tax through August. In our street project breakdown report, we have expended $910,000 towards streets, sidewalks, and trail projects through August. We have added a new report this month that shows the balance sheet of our water treatment plant. Our assets, net of depreciation, total $3.2 million. Those are some of the highlights of the financial statements through August. Are there any questions?
On the water treatment plant, do you know what the remaining time is on the depreciable assets?
I don't have that in front of me, but I can have it in our next meeting.
All right, any comments or questions regarding the financial report? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the report or approve the report?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Ms. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. The next item is the 2010 appropriation ordinance. This would be the second reading and final passage of the ordinance. There is a change to it from the previous reading, and Mr. Kessel or Mrs. Johnson, are you going to present that change?
Thank you, President Johnson. The change that you have at this point is related to the hospitality tax, and it changes the special revenue fund from $542,500 to $650,000. That's the expected revenue that we think will be generated by the hospitality tax in 2010.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kessel. At this time, we'd ask if there's anyone from the public that would like to speak regarding the budget ordinance. If so, step to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. No one from the public wishes to speak. Any comments or questions by commissioners?
So if we were to change the ordinance that we considered a little while ago, what would we need? We need a revision of the budget then, huh?
I believe so. again, if we look at these revenue projections, and these are my revenue projections, I mean, I'm the one that developed them. If they're correct, we have sufficient monies coming from the occupancy tax to cover the CVB's annual operating budget without allocating any from the hospitality tax. So it'd be my recommendation that in this initial budget, we show $0 there. Now, as Ms. Thiel pointed out, they think those numbers are too optimistic in terms of revenue projections, and they very well could be. But I would think that if it turns out that they are too optimistic, I know I, as a commissioner, would be agreeable to amend our budget and cover any shortfall there if that turns out to be the case. But, so I guess that's all I would have to say on that, but.
And I would too.
Any other comments or questions?
I'd move for second reading and final passage of 1372.
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. We have a proclamation that has been requested that we declare. Mr. Kessel, is there anything you'd like to say about this proclamation?
The proclamation is related to those who are vision impaired in our community. It encourages people to be aware of those people, especially when they're traveling throughout our community, walking, using our sidewalks and such, that if you see a dog or somebody using a white cane, that you exercise extreme caution and make allowances for the vision impaired. Certainly, it's an admirable proclamation and one I hope that we'll execute.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. I'll go ahead and read this. It says, whereas the white cane serves as a symbol that identifies individuals with sight loss and also serves as the primary mobility aid that allows people who are blind to travel independently, and whereas the white cane or a dog guide allows persons who are blind and or have sight loss to move freely and safely from place to place and thus fully participate in our society. And whereas all of our citizens should be aware and appreciate the North Dakota law requires the motorists exercise appropriate caution when approaching and passing a person who is using a white cane or dog guide. And whereas North Dakota traffic statutes also require drivers of motor vehicles to yield the right-of-way to individuals utilizing a visible white cane or dog guide, and whereas the City of Dickinson and the State of North Dakota, through its public offices and with the cooperative assistance of the North Dakota Association of the Blind and the American Council of the Blind, shall endeavor to ensure greater safety for persons with vision loss by efforts to educate the general public of these traffic laws. Now therefore, I, Dennis W. Johnson, President of the City Commission of Dickinson, do hereby proclaim October 15, 2009 as White Cane Safety Day in the city of Dickinson, North Dakota. I do call upon our government offices, city officials, and citizens of Dickinson to abide by North Dakota white cane laws and call upon our officials and law officers to enforce these laws. And do ask that all residents of Dickinson would recognize the white cane as a symbol that identifies individuals with sight loss, and that they would recognize that the white cane and dog guides are aids that provide persons who are blind and sight impaired with safe modes of independent travel in our communities and on our state highways, city streets, and intersections, and that motorists would use caution and yield the right-of-way to such individuals. And I'm very pleased to be able to sign this proclamation. And Commissioner Steiner, if you could pass that down to Mr. Kessel. Okay, we'll move to item F, and that's to hear a report on the property owner and builder exemption issue. This had quite a discussion at the previous meeting, and I think Mr. Colling has a report to make.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, Commissioners. I just want to report on this item tonight. We do have a draft resolution that has been put together and will be put before you at the next meeting. But following your discussion at the last meeting, the draft resolution that we've prepared at this point provides for a tax exemption that is allowed by state law of up to $75,000, the first $75,000 for new residential property, and also provides for a tax exemption to the builder as provided under state law for the first $150,000 of the new construction. The resolution also incorporates all the changes that were made at the state legislature to the availability of the exemption, and we'll plan to bring the formal resolution before you at your next meeting.
I think the purpose of reporting on this, too, is to give you a chance to give any feedback to Mr. Colling. I know Mr. Kessel and I had a discussion after the meeting and said this was kind of our sense of what we thought a consensus was forming around, and asked that Mr. Colling would start to draft a resolution and report back to you. I guess now's your opportunity to give some feedback on whether or not we did a decent job of kind of concluding what the consensus was here.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Frenzel.
The feeling that I'm getting from the community is that the exemption should be $100,000 for homeowners for 2 years, and builders for 1 year at $100,000, which is somewhat at odds with what you got there, but that's the position that I'd be coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Frenzel. Is anybody else getting similar input or dissimilar input? Anybody else?
I too think that I would like to see this tipped away from the builder a little bit and toward the homeowner. One of the other things that bothers me with what I'm seeing is the 10 houses for one builder. And the idea that we could have 10 homes sitting empty per builder bothers me a little bit, that we would be essentially subsidizing that. So I'd like to see it tipped a little bit the other way too.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Other comments?
Maybe I made all mine last time,
That's fine.
Mr.
Mr.
President?
Colling.
I should have mentioned earlier, too, the draft resolution that we have in place right now does allow for up to 10 homes per builder to be exempted from taxation. That's the maximum amount allowed by state law. You could curb that back if that is something that you feel is appropriate.
I just have one question, Mr. President. Years, when do we start? Is it at the permit? Are we going to set permit, change a deed? That's something that's not in here, because there was a lot of discussion in your group meetings, I think, too. When does this exemption actually start? When you get the permit, or when you pass the deed, or? Kyle, help us out.
I think the state law was fairly explicit there. Mr. Colling,
Yes,
address that?
what state law provides for is the builder's exemption starts from the beginning of construction. The homeowner's exemption starts from the transfer of the deed, from when the owner comes into ownership of the property.
And then it'll still stay at the 2-year and one one deed holder only, right? If they buy the home and
That's
they
correct.
sell it within a year, it does not transfer.
It only applies to the first owner of the property.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr.
What about the
Frenzel.
case where I, as the builder or the homeowner, own the lot, and I hire the builder to build it for me? There's not going to be a deed. I already own it. I own the real estate.
That's correct. And in that case, in a case where the owner owns the property and is having a builder build it for him, you'll be eligible only for the owner's exemption.
He'd be, for an owner's exemption, yes. But at what point does it start? What's the beginning date for my exemption? The date of certificate of occupancy is issued for the house so that I can actually live in it? Because I already own the property. There's not going to be a deed transfer, so that deed transfer isn't going to apply.
That's a good question. And I will have to take a look at that. My recollection of it is that it requires a transfer of the deed. But
But, you know, there are a lot of cases in the history of our Dickinson where the homeowner owned the lot, bought the lot, and then hired the builder to build the house, and got the exemption based on the property, the building permit. Now, I'm wondering, if, since we're talking about when the house is completed, the certificate of occupancy would be the next thing
That's a
I
good
think
question.
we relied on. I think it's something that needs to be researched, because otherwise we're going to leave out a whole bunch of people.
let me take a look at that and report back, if I may.
Thank you, Mr. Frenzel. That's a good point. You know, the builder's exemption only applies, as I understand it, Mr. Colleen, if the home doesn't sell. And then I mean, if there isn't a buyer for it, as when it's under construction, the property tax assessment doesn't start until 2 years is reached from the time they started building. Is that correct?
You're talking about for the builder's exemption?
Builder's exemption.
The builder is exempt from the date of construction. So the builder could, under the statute, I believe, hold the property for 2 years without
Right.
paying tax.
From the time they start for up to 2 years, they wouldn't be liable for property taxes. But if they own the property beyond that time, then it's on the tax rolls and they're paying taxes.
That's correct.
So I guess I'm not too troubled by the $150,000 limit, or help me out on state law. Did the state law put the $150,000 limit, or did we?
The $150,000 limit is for the owner's exemption, not for the builder's.
Right, but in your presentation here, you've said your resolution is going to have $150,000 for the builder.
For the builder's exemption.
But state law didn't set that.
That's
number.
correct.
We could have it just be whatever the value of the house is.
It could be an unlimited exemption.
Unlimited exemption. Personally, I would be fine with it being the unlimited amount rather than a limit. And, you know, if the average home to build here, for example, is $200,000 and the builder has 10 of them, they've got $2 million out there in investments. I'm not sure that too many of our builders are going to build 10 spec homes and take that kind of risk. But at any rate, once they've held it for 2 years, it's on the tax rolls. They're liable for taxes. So, we have a difference of opinion up here. I don't know how you're going to write a resolution that.
Resolutions are always subject to change.
That's right, they are. But I guess we want them to get a close enough starting point where,
Well, Mr. President, I think we have till February, right, to get this right? So,
yeah, was that the date? I can't remember.
That's the assessment date, and that's the time the Board of Equalization will have to meet to find the tax
Okay.
exemptions that apply.
Well, I think it's fair to say we'd certainly invite more public comment back to commissioners on their feelings here. I know I made the point at the last meeting, things are really pretty good in our community from a building perspective. We have very low mortgage rates, we have pretty strong demand. I think it does make sense that we limit the exemption to the buyers right now, and as economic conditions change, then increase those exemptions when we have a less favorable economic climate for home building. Are you ready to have this come on the agenda or for action, or should we keep it on here for reports for a while and have this kind of discussion?
I think we need to have more reports. I know that this is, on however we word this, is going to mean extra work for our city assessor, right? John, are you ready to have it on the books already or not?
If I could just make one comment, I understand we have our assessment date, February 1st to have it done, but I believe it would be nice to have it a little sooner than later if we could. I mean, I'm not, if you have to bring it back for a couple more meetings, that would be fine, but it helps us through our process when we have people building already. We've been asked since, August already what's going on and what we're doing with it. It'll just make our process easier when they're building to let them know where we're at with it. Because right now, I just basically tell them, we're under the old existing right now, and we'll have to wait until we make a decision.
So if you had to put a deadline on us, what would you put down?
It would be nice, by December, I would like to see something done by the beginning of December.
First
That would-
meeting in December?
Yeah, yes, that would be great.
What do you think? Can we accommodate that deadline, do you think? Okay. Well, then, we'll try our best to act on the resolution at the first meeting in December. That would tell me that we can keep this on as reports, and Mr. Colling, if you want to draft 1 or 2 or 3 possible scenarios, you go ahead, and we'll keep discussing it till we think we can see something coming that would be ready to act on.
I can do that.
Is that-
I'd be fine if we did it a month from now, so Jan can get ready. We can offer amendments as needed and dispose of it.
Well, I know one thing that the realtors would love it is the sooner the better, right, Joe? So we know how to figure out, and you're the one that gets the calls, and the builders, they need to know too.
Right, you're dealing with people that are buying homes, and they're, doing tax estimates and wondering where they're going to be standing with that exemption, that's true.
Well, let's say we'll do it no later than the first meeting in December, and if we can get it a meeting or 2 in front of that, we'll do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Public safety, Chief Sivak.
President Johnson, Commissioners, the representative from United Blood Services had to cancel at the last moment, so that presentation won't be taking place this evening. With your permission, I will continue with Part 2 under Tab 5.
Okay.
Okay. In your packets, you'll find a copy of the proclamation signed by Governor Hoeven stating that October 4th through 10th is Fire Prevention Week in the state of North Dakota, and fire prevention activities are well underway with the Dickinson Fire Department. Today alone, we had 84 students visit the fire department. We started prior to this week by presenting fire safety lessons to over 250 students at Dickinson High School. And our activities will continue not only through this week, but well through next week as well. As an aside, past history is important to the fire service, and that's no different with the Dickinson Fire Department and past history with our community. And if you bear with me for just a second, I'd just like to mention that we've had a couple of significant fire losses in our past history, and I don't mean recent past history. In 1949, the Villard Hotel burned January 20th of 1949 between between Bogies and the Brick House is where that hotel had stood. 1950, February 1st of 1950, the St. Charles Hotel burned down. and that was where Jordheim's Gym is located today. There was one death in that fire. If you're so inclined, and if history means something to you as it does to us, if you get on the internet and type in St. Charles Hotel Fire, Dickinson, North Dakota, you'll be able to view a 16-millimeter film clip of that fire. That was made, we were made aware of that by Police Officer Hannell, and it's quite interesting. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Seabuck. Just for the record, I wasn't mayor when neither of those fires occurred. We'll move to tab 6, Public Works Engineering. Mr. Soren.
Thank you, President Johnson, City Commissioners. The first item I have is a project to do some improvements at the intersection of Sims Street and Museum Drive. As you may be aware, this intersection through the past winter took a beating with the drainage and things at that location, and so in order to rectify that, we are proposing a concrete intersection at that location. We did open bids for this project. We had 2 bidders with Two's Construction and Wind Construction. Two's Construction was the low bidder at $89,807. Which was about $12,000 below Wind Construction's bid. We are recommending that we award this project to Two's Construction. We did receive funds because of the winter, I guess, to do these types of projects to fix up the streets in this area. I believe we have about just under $500,000 in that fund, and that will be used to complete this project.
Thank you, Mr. Soren. You've heard his report and recommendations. Any comments or questions by commissioners? No comments or questions. Is there a motion regarding this item?
I'll move we award the contract to Two's.
We have the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Continue, Mr. Soren.
Under the reports, I do have a couple sets of minutes for your information. If you have any questions regarding those, I'd be happy to try and answer those. Would like to look at the code enforcement report just a little bit. Point out that to date, we've got 19 commercial permits that have been issued compared to 18 last year, so we're holding fairly well on the commercial building. Are in discussions right now with another hotel that's coming to town, hoping to get the footings in the ground before winter again. Of course, that's pushing us pretty quick, as we can see today. Single-family structures, we've increased a little bit, still behind last year. I think some of that increase, we're starting to see some of the tornado homes coming into where they're building new homes in that number. And of course, we did have the public, which is the activity centers showing up in here finally, which shows the total dollars for permit values of new of $35 million so far that's going into the community. If there's any questions regarding that report, I'd be happy to try and answer those as well.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Soren? All right.
Just to have one other comment, just to make you aware. Heard actually late Friday and today that it's looking like with our stimulus projects coming to the end, that we may have another round where we may have about $217,000 left for another project we could do with that. In working with Mr. Seabuck, one of the issues that's been pointed out to us is some of our signal controllers and our preemption devices that are aging and we can't get parts for them. We're looking at that as a possibility, as a project that we could be submitting for those additional funds, but as I learn more about that, I certainly keep you informed. We are looking at a planned completion of late January, I think, at this point on that project.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Soren. Other comments or questions? Okay, if it's none, we'll move to tab 8, City Administrator's Report.
Thank you, President Johnson. At our last commission meeting, you held a hearing for liquor license violators. We had 2 that had multiple violations in a 24-month period, so they had to serve 1 day of suspension. Those days are September 27th. Ponderosa Liquors served their 1 day, and on October 6th, tomorrow, El Sombrero will be serving theirs. So if you have reservations for tomorrow, your margaritas will be virgin. On the next item is H.R. 413. This is a bill that's in the federal process. It is a bill that would allow collective bargaining rights for public safety officers at the state and local level, so it would affect us here in Dickinson, and it would allow police and fire personnel to form unions. It would supersede any state law. We are a right-to-work state in North Dakota, and this would supersede any applicable state laws. I was a little hasty in saying that the Fire Chiefs Association are opposed to this legislation, as I've said in my memo. They are discussing it at this time. They've not taken a formal stance. The Police Chiefs Association has, however, taken a formal stance opposed to this legislation. I wanted to make you aware that it is out there and ask if you have any particular stance that you would like to take, which I could then make our federal delegation aware of. My personal recommendation is in opposition to H.R. 413.
I think Mr. Kessel's looking for some feedback. Any comments by commissioners?
From what little I know, I'd agree that we should oppose it.
Okay.
Anybody else?
What I'd like to do then at the next commission is submit a letter, which then you can then review and then either approve or deny, and then we can forward that on to our federal delegation, specifically the senators. It has already passed the House. The next item then is the census 2010. Lori Jordheim has been hired as the census coordinator, and she is housed at Stark Development and the Chamber of Commerce building. Subcommittees are being formed as a means to disseminate information and contact undercounted populations. There's 3 different groups that are being focused on. The first being students at Dickinson State University, the second being snowbirds, or those people who live in our community until the snow starts flying, and the third is oil field workers. You can and should be counted if you live in the city of Dickinson for 6 months plus 1 day. That is your majority household, and that's where you should be counted. So we are focusing efforts on trying to count those people who we feel were undercounted in our 2000 census. So if Ms. Jordheim, maybe we'll have her present at a next commission meeting on her progress. She's in the audience if you'd like to.
I think if you'd be ready to present at our next meeting, that would be appropriate. Would you like to do that and give us an update? Okay. Vikings and Packers aren't playing that night, so we can. Okay.
Taking that cue, I'll try to be brief with my last few items. The next is a land sale to facilitate Section 8 housing. The tornado affected 30 units of Section 8 housing on our south side. Those units are being removed as we speak, including their foundations. The land has transferred ownership and is now in the hands of Metro Plains and Two's Construction. They formed a corporation who now owns that property. We are looking at an opportunity to sell some city land to replace that Section 8 housing, because the zoning changed approximately 10 years ago and no longer allows that housing to be built on site unless there would be a zoning change. The memo that I've prepared and submitted to you outlines basically the parameters around the square footages that are included, and the dollars per square foot that we would hope to sell the land for, and of course, purchase that land on the south side. So I'm presenting this to you in the form of a report. If you have any feedback in regards to the square footage cost or purchase price, I'd be interested in hearing that discussion. By the way, the 30 units are likely to be replaced by close to 50 units. So we will see an increase in housing units. Then they will not be in the form of apartments, they'll be in the form of townhomes. So there'll be groups of about 6 or 8 townhomes rather than multi-level apartment structures.
And Sean, those will be 30 low income and 20 for regular, right?
That's correct. There's the Section 8 housing will not apply to all 50 units. There'll be market rate-based apartments as well, or townhomes, excuse me.
I think the prices that you have there are fair, and I would support those.
Okay.
Sounds like a good activity.
Okay, excellent, thank you. The next update then, if there's no other comments on that one, is a public building update. The first is on our Baylor building. We have all the repairs done except the new crane and installation of new doors. A slight typo, the damage will exceed a little bit more than $5,000. It'll actually exceed around $300,000 in total damages once all said and done. We are expecting all the expenses to be covered. There might be an issue with the crane, but the deductible for that building is only $1,000. So we're in discussions regarding the crane, and hopefully those expenses will be covered. The museum center is scheduled to open today. We're excited to have that building back and open to the public. They were having an excellent year prior to the issues that we received. And this is actually a good example of where the hospitality tax dollars in that construction reserve account that Attorney Colling spoke to earlier, we'll be using that reserve, that capital construction reserve, to pay for the expenses in getting this building open. So it'll be around $15,000 or so that we'll tax that reserve account for. And then the last item that I have that's not on your agenda is we just received word that the EECBG grant that we applied for to the federal government for just over $60,000 has been approved, so we can move forward with those projects. The 3 projects that will be affected are more efficient lighting on our street, excuse me, armory roof replacement, and we did a recycling survey, and we're going to seek other opportunities, determine a plan on just how much we can and desire to recycle in our community. So it'll pay for those expenses related to developing that plan. So I'm excited to let you know. That concludes my report unless there's questions. Go Vikings.
Any comments or questions for Mr. Kessel?
I just have one question. The water tower, the new one, when is that going to be in operation? Or that's a
It's
question for Sean, I'm not sure.
that water tower is in operation. There's and maybe the question sometimes I hear about water pressure in states.
Right.
The feeder main project that you approved the easement for today will help the water pressure issue in states. So until that's fully constructed, they're not going to see the benefits necessarily of that water tower in terms of water pressure. And Engineer Soren, if you would like to expand.
Yeah, just to add a little to that, we have started that project for the water main, 12-inch water main, to tie that in. I believe it's a completion date around the middle of November, so it's a tight time frame. But at that point is when we're looking to have it fully functional the way we're anticipating it to be.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Not, we'll move to item 9, accounts payable and payroll. Is there a motion to, or well, I should ask, is there any payables that you wish to discuss? If not, would there be a motion then to approve the payables and payroll?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. Are there any items that any city commissioner would like to bring to the attention of the commission? If not, is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to the commission? If so, step to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments. There's no one from the public. Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have the motion and the second to adjourn. All in